Welcome to Masters of Product Management, a show that gives you real-world techniques and cutting-edge strategies to learn, apply, and succeed in product management. Now, here's the master himself, Stephen Haines.
Over the course of my career, I used to have this thing where I'd get a new boss about once a year. And once in a 2-year period, I had 3 bosses. Okay. And not only that, at higher levels of the company, the senior leaders always seem to churn at a very, very high rate. And it really got me thinking, every boss that I had, every leader that came through the company, they had their own way of doing stuff. And it had an impact on people. For me, I saw things like there were ways in which people communicated, styles, behaviors that they engendered, culture that they established. And later in my career, I found it incredibly exasperating. And not only that, my direct reports found it exasperating. I used to do these skip level meetings, from the individual contributors, and we'd bypass the directors just for these informal chats like at lunchtime. And one point, one woman said to me, you guys change your mind so often that I'm just going to not think about what I have to do. I'll just wait for you to tell me what to do. And that really, really bothered me. What I took away from this was that this inconsistency was just not acceptable. Leaders didn't understand that there was this ripple effect that they had across the organization. And I got to tell you, I believe most of us know what this looks like and feels like. So not too long ago, I was talking to my friend and colleague, Nicole Lipkin, about this. And Nicole is an organizational psychologist and the CEO of a company called Equilibria Consulting. And she focuses on things like leadership development and organizational effectiveness. And she's also a published author of books like What Keeps Leaders Up at Night. So Nicole, welcome to the show.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me here.
Oh, it's great to have you. So you and I have had this discussion enough times on this topic called inconsistent bossing or inconsistent leadership.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you'd be willing to share some of your thoughts about this with our listeners.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics, and it's what pushed me into entrepreneurialism. I'll tell you that. One of the worst bosses I ever had. I could not have been more inconsistent.
Oh my.
But when you think about it, everything in our biology is designed to maintain equilibrium, right? To maintain balance. And so when we experience inconsistency as humans, it completely messes us up. It's just like inconsistent parenting, a parent that hugs a child for doing something well one day, and the next day the child does the same thing because that's what they're expecting. Like this is a good behavior. And then the parent freaks out on them. All of a sudden you're creating problems with that child, and you're setting that child up for some major problems. It's the same thing. We're all kids, we're just adult versions of kids.
I think so sometimes. That's for sure.
Exactly. So it's really interesting, the scientific underpinnings that, and the consequences, the scientific consequences that occur, with humans, with people, regardless of who you are in the workplace.
Yeah. There are a couple of things. It's interesting. When we talk about this inconsistency, and I believe this. I really subscribe to this idea that children learn what they live, and employees learn what they live, mostly through their parents in the work environment. Sure. And there are 2 dimensions that I think are worthy of study. Number one, or at least discussion. Number one is the consequences on the organization, and number 2, the downstream effect on customers and what they see. Can you talk to the organizational piece, and then we'll talk about customers?
Yeah, sure. And I think, and actually it's kind of the same thing. So the first thing that happens when you have inconsistency or inconsistent bossing, what ends up happening is you start developing learned helplessness, right? And this means like over time, like what Pavlov's dogs experienced. It caused depression because again, you're doing a certain behavior and expecting a certain outcome, but all of a sudden you get a different outcome, which was not what you're promised, right? And over time, you don't know what to do or how to behave. And over time, it creates a sense of learned helplessness, which we know organizationally equates to major disengagement. And disengaged cultures have extreme consequences when it comes to performance, productivity, workplace safety, trickles down to customer relationships, customer retention. Yeah. The other thing is that, as humans, we process negative experiences much more thoroughly than positive experiences. It's just our negative information is much more easy to retrieve. We also just talk about it more. We assign bigger adjectives to it. We talk about it. We complain more. We like to complain. Always the things like he's great, but this job pays well, but the big hairy butts of the world, right? So,
oh boy, watch out.
The thing is, because we process negative information more when we have a negative experience with someone. Even if that person has been very positive in our lives, that negative experience is much easier to retrieve than the positive experiences. And it often takes 5 positive experiences to make up for that one negative experience. So that one inconsistent experience is what ends up sticking out in people's minds.
Yeah. It's interesting. When you talk about this, both helplessness and this negativity, and I don't want our listeners to say that we're going to have like a bummer show today because, we're going to lift you out of this. But, what I observe in the workplace is that employees seem scared. Product managers, business people, marketers. It's that the leaders, they're sort of just waiting for the leaders to tell them what to do. What's the marching order? And the other side of this coin is that the leaders they have this expectation that managers, product managers and others are going to take the bull by the horns and lead. And it sets up this pattern where it's almost like organizational paralysis. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, you're talking about expectations, right? You're talking about the expectation, and a lot of times these unsaid expectations of people acting in a certain way or people acting like leading from every seat. But the thing is that if these expectations aren't communicated, and also if people are not taught the skills of how to lead, then you're just setting people up for failure. And when you set people up for failure, a sense of paralysis can occur where you don't know what someone's expecting from you. We experience that in relationships, in any kind of relationships. You don't know how to act when you don't know what's expected. And I think that is one of the biggest missed opportunities of organizations and of leaders, of individuals, that the time isn't taken to clearly identify, hey, this is what's expected in your role. This is what's expected in our managerial relationship. This is how I expect you to interact with customers, whatever it might be. Just laying that out can prevent so much damage and prevent so many unintended consequences. And again, that trickle down to the customer is pretty common when someone's not feeling, or when someone's feeling paralyzed, or when someone's not feeling like they understand what they're supposed to be doing.
You're listening to Masters of Product Management with Stephen Haines on the Sequent Business Network, sequentbusiness.net.
I not only have experienced this as a person who worked in companies, but I see it now where the bosses use very explicit language about what they expect from leaders, whether they're individual contributors or that they're managers of others. And sometimes, you see the head nodding, okay, but you don't see behaviors changing. What do you think stands in the way of behavioral change when it comes to people leading from the seat, people who are individual contributors and others?
Great question. I think a few things. First of all, it's one thing to lay out your expectations, but if someone doesn't have a skill set, if I'm not a great communicator, let's say, and I'm told that I need to be a better communicator, that's not going to really help me be a better communicator. I obviously, if I'm not doing it well, it means I don't have the skill set. So first of all, I might need development and training in that area. So I think one of the things that stands in the way is this expectation that people are going to be a certain way without the correct training and development to help that person. The other thing is without the correct feedback. We are horrible at receiving and giving feedback. It is something that humans are just so uncomfortable with.
But we're good at criticizing people.
We're great at criticizing, but but even when we're giving constructive criticism, it's a very rare individual that actually gives useful constructive criticism, meaning, Nicole, you're not a good communicator. Well, that doesn't tell me anything. What tells me something is, Nicole, in that interaction that you had with the client yesterday, what I noticed is that you weren't making eye contact, and when they were talking, you looked at your watch several times, and you talked around the point, versus getting to the point, whatever it might be. that's me giving very specific feedback about communication versus this big, vague, you're not doing well in this area.
Yeah. Do you think that managers of others are doing a good enough job at both those observations and that feedback loop? I mean, you said that we do a crappy job at doing feedback, but
it depends. I think it depends. If you're in a culture of feedback, if you're in an organization that has a culture that values feedback, you're going to be more likely to be comfortable receiving and giving feedback. If you're in a culture that values training and development, you're going to be more likely to have the access to receive the development you need. So I think it really very much depends on the company and the culture, and also your team or the leader of your team.
Yeah, I agree with you for sure. So I think that we've acknowledged that there are some really major issues here, and that we, as managers and people who are our listeners, who are individual contributors and product managers who have struggled with words, we've now put some names to it, to this learned helplessness or this negativity. We have it within our power to lead in our organizations. And I think we really can lead by being better. I think the real opportunity for people who are product managers and others is to understand what's necessary to actually lead when they are not feeling in the best of spirits. Maybe the culture is not accepting, maybe the feedback isn't there. How can people become more self-aware and to assert themselves so that they can get past some of these obstacles?
Well, I think, look, engagement, leadership, all of this stuff, it's a two-way street, right? It's not just dependent on someone telling you to do something or be better at something or get training or whatever it might be. It's also up to you as an individual to recognize your own strengths and recognize your weaknesses, your Achilles heel, right? And to seek out resources and to seek out the feedback from other people to gain better insight. It really comes down to not being afraid to hear. No one's perfect. We all have weaknesses. It comes down to not being afraid to hear and receive the feedback about what you need development on, and then to seek it out yourself. If you are in a culture where training and development is not valued, that does not mean that you can't go seek it out on your own.
That's correct. It's interesting.
It's about professional development, personal development.
Absolutely. In my corporate life, the leaders used to say, part of your professional development is up to you. Don't just wait for us to go do this.
Yeah.
Be proactive. And what you're suggesting is seek out feedback. One of the things that I have found extremely helpful, is to find mentors.
Yeah.
It's really quite interesting that at one point in my career, I was actually assigned a mentor, which was sort of a shaky relationship because we were sort of forced together. It was like forced dating in a company. I really didn't like that. But it's like when you have a problem or a situation and you sort of know through your network within your organization who are the people who might be able to help you, actually reaching out and asking for help will put you in a favorable light. As a matter of fact, it's actually one of the best things you could do to actually lead by asking for help. And that by even doing that, sometimes other managers recognize you as a person who is continuously learning, and others may end up seeking you out as a person who can help.
And you're building your network.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, no successful person has ever done things alone.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
And then I'm not defining success as money. I'm not defining success in a certain way. I'm just saying in general, no balanced, happy individual has done it alone.
Yeah.
Everyone needs help and support.
That is a great concluding statement.
Thank you very much.
I really, really appreciate that. So everybody, I've been talking to Nicole Lipkin today, who's brought us some really, really great insights to help product managers and business people gain some traction and become better leaders. And I hope you'll agree and that you'll share this podcast with your colleagues and tune into the Sequent Business Network next time for more ideas about how to improve product management. Thanks for listening.
This has been Masters of Product Management with Stephen Haines, but it doesn't end there. Just visit sequentbusiness.net to gain access to all of our shows, take advantage of free tools and resources, and subscribe. That way you'll never miss an episode. It's all there at sequentbusiness.net. We'll talk to you next time on Masters of Product Management on the Sequent Business Network. Learn, apply, and succeed. sequentbusiness.net.